That was a terrific panel. It's always fascinating to me to hear, what CMOs and the marketers are thinking, because it just helps kind of like guide us back towards true north. And I think with your backgrounds, for those of you that don't know, perhaps first, I could just say that Scott Peters, co-founder, head partner at Growth Catalyst Partners, and Gil is, no, I know Gil. I was just trying to see if you're with us. Gil Ozier, managing partner at Behringer Capital. I've known Scott and Gil for many years. I've known them in different capacities. They've got an amazing amount of experience in the industry prior to their becoming investors, private equity investors in our industry. And I thought that was really where I'd want to start, our industry, right? Because we sometimes make the broad statement about our industry, and Scott and Gil, have a very interesting perspective on that, about how how you look at, quote unquote, our industry. So,
you want me to say something, or go ahead, Gil?
Well, I mean,
Let it rip.
I think you can break it down into different component parts, and on the one side, you've got the content piece and how that's monetized through advertising and subscriptions. There are marketing services embedded in there. Certainly, events is a big part of it, and increasingly data. So you could talk about all of those separately, or how they interconnect together, to the extent they do interconnect together. Maybe if we start with content, just to kick it off. Right. I think we're in a place today where the platforms clearly are gobbling up, or have gobbled up, most of the traffic. And now we're in a zero-click AI world where there's just less traffic to go around. And so the risk is, in that business, I would say, does search continue to deteriorate? I read a MediaLink article that suggests that if it goes from 20% to 10%, the open web basically breaks. So does that happen?
I read a report this morning that said 37% of online traffic is human.
Oh my God, it's gone up.
37%.
Right.
But I think the opportunity on that is, can you outflank AI? And I think you can do that in the content world. Because if you focus in on depth, which I don't think AI is particularly good at, capturing nuance, unique voice. If you focus on more timely content, breaking news, recency, AI is less good at, and certainly engagement, because AI is like a one-way conversation with a articulate sycophant.
So sticking with content, for a moment. So let's say that a SIM comes across both of your inboxes, and you sort of crack that open. What would be your advice to the folks here in this room? Like, what's the high ground that they should be thinking about occupying if they're in a business like that, where, and maybe the business development path, where you're going to take that hard look and say, okay, this looks like it might be something I can invest in, versus pass.
Yeah, I'll go back with a little historical perspective, I guess. And I know a bunch of people in this room have been in this business a long time. Back 25 years ago, we were working in B2B media and conferences and events, and then all of a sudden valuations split one day, where investors looked at trade shows and said, wow, look at those profit margins and EBITDA, like we should just break these out and get rid of all this content and audience crap, right? And so they split these things out. And all along, we were at the time investment bankers, selling a lot of these companies, and I just was always scratching my head, saying, like, what are you doing?
What are you doing?
That's like, there's such an advantage if you keep those models together and do it well and do it right. But didn't matter. Financial industry sort of did what it did, and it's taken a long time before I think the absolute opposite. It's all coming back now, and so. If you look at, certainly from our lens, it is all about the community. It's all about the relationship you have with that end customer, and it's, can you deliver to your it depends on the business model, but let's say to your customer who's looking to get in front of active buyers, can you deliver a unique, trusted experience across all channels in one place and be really smart about it and make it efficient? And you can only do that if you've got events, data, content, research, and all sorts of engagement practices in the middle. And the models that do that really well are so fundamentally advantaged. We own a business called Cyber Risk Alliance. At the heart of their business is a database of 3.5 million cybersecurity professionals. We know so much about those people, what they're buying, what they're reading, what they're interested in, when their purchasing signals start sort of pinging. And then we run events all around it. But when you talk about our business model, there are competitors out there that run conferences that have to spend tons of money to get people to show up at their events. We make tons of money, with that same marketing footprint and don't pay anything to get people at the events. They're just fundamentally better models, and so we look for that certainly, or look to build it in our case in businesses.
And that's interesting. So it's although you make the distinction between let's say an event-driven, a content-driven, data-driven, et cetera, business, I think what I'm hearing is being able to operate across all of those domains for a specific audience. Now, if I could maybe ask you both, take it one step further, right? So in some businesses, you would find a very specific focus on let's say a well-defined industry or a well-defined community. In others, you have more of a multi-vertical model. Do you think about those differences differently, just from a pure attractiveness or evaluation perspective?
I'll give a very quick answer, and then you can. But we are very, very big believers in vertical focus. So it's no longer okay to just say I'm really good at content, therefore I should publish against 13 different categories. It's hard to do that. I think if you have vertical focus and really pay attention to what are you doing for your customer and get into their psyche and understand what your value proposition is against the competition, and really figure that out on a vertical level, it's so complicated. And just to spend 100% of your time focused on that one particular industry vertical, you're just advantaged over. And that's, I don't mean, no offense to people who are in multiple markets, because they both can work, but we're just big fans of vertical.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of power in that, certainly, and a very defensible moat, particularly if you have that kind of data behind it. But if you take a different lens on it, and then you think about, well, what really unlocks value in these types of businesses, I think the ones that are going to do better are the ones that look less like content businesses and more like platforms, like utilities, like communities. You think in like the general news market, companies like the Free Press, if you follow them, and what they've done creating a real multimedia platform. Or the New York Times is really a utility business around recipes I can't do and games I can't play. A business that we own in financial news space, Benzinga, is really about tools, data and tools for investors. Or a company we've got in the residential real estate market, Inman, is about community. So definitely to look at it from a vertical angle, and there's a lot of power in focus, but I think you also need to look at it from the standpoint of what does this boil up into that creates real value for the business, for the client.
And on that, real value point, I mean, I think one of the things that we can say is, or we can see, is that there's a point of convergence for value creation, regardless of sort of the business line or the business type that we're talking about here. Data is the sort of agreed point of convergence, right? But what does that actually mean? Like when you're looking at these businesses, do you see commonalities among operators that are leveraging data to drive more value? Do you see divergences? They've got a lot of data, but they're struggling. They haven't monetized. So, how do you look at that and evaluate the businesses, like the intrinsic value that you perceive to be there?
Yeah, I think when you look at data, and AI is making this really interesting, because AI can very efficiently aggregate, nearly anything if it's open source. And so I think if you've got proprietary information, which many companies here have, this is information about your audience or about your domain or sector, that the public domain doesn't know. So to start there and differentiate proprietary insight and data from public domain data. And when you get into proprietary, then you look across the different business models that exist in this room. So for example, we look at events as manufacturing facilities for proprietary data. I mean, it's great. People get together. There's trust. There's value to that. But on the back end of that, if you do it right, who came, what were the subjects that they talked about, who did they engage with, what did they interact with, and what's the takeaway. That data sits on top of that individual. Maybe it sounds creepy, but it's business. But you really understand a lot about that professional and what they care about. And then when you take that and you map it across the rest of your business and those intent signals, which again, out of content, you're getting proprietary data signals.
Right.
Out of research, out of your website.
Engagement.
It's just, you get a lot of really interesting data. AI is allowing you to do much more intelligent things around those data sets. I think that is fundamentally a huge advantage when you're trying to either sell audiences or allow your customers to engage with them.
Gil, I actually, the phrase that I heard, manufacturing facilities for data, I think was the way that Scott put that, which kind of strikes me as a very interesting way of describing events, because I've always thought that obviously events generate an enormous amount of data, but in your case, because I know you've both analyzed and now as an investor invested in these kind of businesses as well.
I think there's a huge opportunity to do two things. Number one, finally answer the question, which I think is more prevalent in an outcomes-based world, which is what ROI did I get from this event? And I think the impatience with that is only going to increase, particularly as these things become more expensive. But then, and this is what I think you guys were coming at, there's a gold dust all over the cutting room floor of an event, in these panels, in the keynotes, in the conversations that are happening, in the booths. Where is the signal liquidity, picking that up and spinning that into insights? Maybe you can monetize it or just make it more interesting or sticky. I love events. I think they're notoriously lazy around innovation. And that is one area that is just ripe for the plucking.
So when you're evaluating businesses and you see, okay, I see the gold dust, right? It's there. Or I like to say that I see all that first party data, and they've taken those acorns and they've thrown them into the barn. But as far as actually monetizing or having a model there to monetize, do you look for that specifically? As you're thinking through your let's say a post acquisition plan.
Yes, but the very frustrating thing about that is, of all the deals that I've looked at in events in the last 2-3 years, I'm always the one that's asking the question. I never hear the founders or entrepreneurs talk about that. Like, oh yeah, of course you want it, but where is it? Because it's been staring you in the face.
Interesting. I don't know if you would agree or disagree, or.
I agree. I think there's a lot of missed opportunity, but it goes back to vertical focus when. Yeah. A lot of what we do in building our companies, we acquire. We look at it as a Lego set. We know what the Lego house needs to look like. We have a point of view on when we're finished. Who is this company going to be very valuable for? And then what are the component parts of the service offering that, when you put it together, are going to really create a competitive advantage in the market? And so, whether it's our GovExec business, Tim was speaking earlier, or Cyber Risk Alliance, or Data Society Group, we look at these businesses, we go out, we acquire skill sets, but the glue that sits between it is this data.
Right.
It is, what do you know from your customer engagement here that maps to this particular engagement, that maps to this industry expertise, and how do you tie it together to make it, again, to have a huge advantage in the marketplace? And it is, events are a fantastic exhaust. And if you look at the conference business, there have been businesses, and I won't name any of them, that have been around for a long time that collect data on behalf of conference companies. there's a reason why those businesses are still tiny.
Right.
Like they've never scaled and become these big businesses.
Right.
It's because their end customer doesn't really know what to do with that data. So they say, here's a flash drive with a crap load of stuff on it, like knock yourself out, and then it gets thrown in the garbage can, and they say, thank you, we got the data, this is awesome, but they don't do anything with it.
Well, I have to tell you, I'm actually, in a way, pleasantly surprised, right? Folks, this isn't rehearsed. I'm pleasantly surprised, like, this part of the description, because in many ways, that's one of the reasons why, Revved Up and the Revenue Room, were started, to help companies sort of, appreciate or evaluate, those opportunities that are there in the data, and begin the process or learn from their peers, how to begin to accelerate, monetization. I think we'll move off of events momentarily, but Paul, I think, had made a comment on one of the panels that about events, basically like the assumption being that events are AI proof right now. That's a theme that you hear pretty consistently, and I wonder again, what your thoughts are around.
Is anything
like,
AI
statement
proof?
like that, right? What's AI proof, right? I know in Paul's case he was saying, be careful because that might actually not be the case. There's a lot of work that we have to do, but AI proof.
The problem with AI proof is we're in a time in the market where AI proof businesses are actually even more highly valued, because it's a safe place to put capital to work. My head spins sometimes with the valuations of these AI-proof businesses. But the problem with that is, how do you get a return on that investment? Because there are natural limitations to events businesses. They can be wall-bound, they can be date-bound. How many little events can you spin up before they start eating at the mothership? More and more expensive to attract audiences. And when you're paying those kinds of multiples, it doesn't take much. A macro shock, a bad year, a competitor nibbling at your heels.
Pandemic.
Yeah, pandemic.
Pandemic, right, exactly, right, yeah.
But to me, that was
Tariffs.
relatively easy because everyone's in the same boat,
Right.
and the budgets were there. But when things start affecting travel and budgets,
Like a government
or both,
shutdown, maybe, right? Yeah, right, exactly.
very hard to recover.
Yeah, there is a dynamic in investing right now where a lot of LPs, so those are the investors in our funds, are really trying to understand what our AI exposure is, and so that goes all the way down, downstream to everybody in the mix. From what companies, what are your portfolio companies, and explain to me why AI is not going to destroy that business, or show me the opportunity that's going to create tons of opportunity. And there's an enormous amount of work going on.
Of back and
on
forth in that, and actually that was exactly, you read my mind, exactly where I was going to say. Okay, so from a diligence standpoint, you're both buyers and sellers. You've got investments, and so you're reinvesting in those businesses every day, effectively. But at the same time, you're owners of those, you're buyers as well. So what's different about the due diligence process itself? Like, okay, so if I'm a seller, if I'm a buyer, either way, what do, as private equity professionals, like, what do you do differently? Do you bring in a different resource? You bring in the accounting firms, obviously, to do quality of earnings, but how does AI risk an opportunity right now getting evaluated?
The question I try to answer with AI is, does it strengthen your moat or weaken your moat? Because we've talked about there are some areas that are having compressed barriers, like publishing, marketing, other areas that are having amplifying advantages, like data workflow. And so we're actually working a lot in different ways with our particularly strategy consulting firms, not only to assess what the business is today and the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, whatever, but to game theory out. What is AI going to do to this? What could it do to this business in this way or this way? And what are the, the second, third level order effects? We're doing that right now with a legal tech services business where, we're wondering, it's a digital forensics business. Does AI enhance the need for that?
Right, or
does
replace.
Or replace,
Right.
yeah. And you need
Right.
to think about it very three-dimensionally. So it's interesting how we're working with strategy consultancies differently in that way.
I would add to that in due diligence with AI tools now, there's no place to hide anywhere. So, we have the ability to literally read every single legal document the company has ever written or has on file.
Right. You're using
go through
AI
every
to do that.
financial model that ever existed within a company. So it's the bar is dramatically higher. Now there's still the trick is to make sense out of it and know where to focus, because it kicks out so much information. But as a company that wants to sell, so if any of you own a business and are thinking about selling, the first thing you should do is create a war room on your own, ingest it up into AI, and reverse engineer that process on yourself, and ask AI, where are the red flags? What would you dig into? And really go through that exercise, because it will point out so many things that are fixable before you pull that trigger and run a process.
That's great advice. Great advice. Great insight as well. Well, look, I see we are out of time. The blinking red light of doom is like shining brightly over there on us, but can't leave the stage without asking the question, if there's actually one thing that you would advise every CEO in this room to stop, and one thing that they should really focus on right now in the current environment. Could you give us the bullet point answers there? Stop what and focus on what?
What I would do, if you want to sell your business in the next 18 months, you said?
Or just in general?
Or just in general?
Yeah, as sellers.
Let's
just say as sellers.
I would spend the next 2 quarters rigorously making your business as efficient as possible. Use AI, be ruthless, bring it down to the core efficiency, and then stop fiddling and focus on the future. What are the future pathways? How do I AI-proof this business? What are the resilience that I need to build in this business?
Right.
Because as an investor, I got to believe that you're already optimized. That's good. Now tell me the future case, or the multiple future cases that make me believe and want to actually invest your business.
Yeah. I would stop being tolerant of pushback around embracing data analytics and AI internally. There's so many people will tell you a million reasons why it's not really relevant and it doesn't affect my business. I would stop listening to that
right away.
Immediately, like, sorry, see you later.
Okay.
And I would start putting from the top down in an organization. If you're leading an organization, you need to be on top of the AI curve. Period. Like, you personally. So get online on the weekends, learn it, understand what the hell everyone's talking about, and lead by example. Because if companies are not led from the top down on a lot of these priorities, like, you're not going to be around in a few years. I mean, it's just.
Well, and there you have it, folks.
Sorry to ruin your weekend, but please go do that.
I asked, they answered. Thank you very much, actually. And by the way, Scott and Gil are going to be here, so feel free while they're out there in the audience.